You're listening to the ProcureTech podcast, your weekly show for all that's cooking in the digital procurement space. Yes, we've got the hottest startups, thought leadership, and conversation from visionary industry experts, and definitely no stiff corporate content. I'm your host, James Meads, Procurement Pro, Digital Nomad, and ProcureTech fanboy. And now, here's this week's show. Yes, hello there, greetings, and thank you for joining me on the show today. We've got another episode of the ProcureTech podcast where we bring you everything that is fun, exciting, and innovative in the digital procurement space, and definitely no interviews or content that will make you want to fall asleep. So this week, we're actually going to be focusing on a pretty small but growing startup that I believe is filling a gap in the market that's currently out there. Because this company has developed a simple to use, intuitive interface software that serves the needs of small and medium sized businesses. And this is the conundrum, isn't it, of how big does a business need to be before they can afford procurement software, and really sort of trading features to be at an attractive enough price point so as it's a viable business for them too. So I'd like to welcome this week's guest to the show, Adam Thomas from Oboloo. Welcome to the ProcureTech podcast.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So before we jump in, just maybe briefly introduce your background and how you became involved in a procurement startup.
So I have been a procurement consultant for the last 8 years, and a friend of mine, was chatting about procurement software, and it looked and sounded interesting. And with my background in procurement, and prior to that, I'd worked in international capital markets, broking and trading. And one of those had been working on a trading platform. Hold on, this has got there's a real need for this in the SME space. So from that, we then developed Oboloo.
And Oboloo focuses on the sort of small to medium sized enterprises market. So what typically, in terms of level of turnover or size of business, would you typically target?
So typically we would target between 5 and 100 million of turnover. The reason for that is that there are many enterprise level companies, and their minimum turnover is around about 100 million. So we're sitting beneath there. It's also going to depend on how much supply under contract companies have. So if a company's got less than 5 million turnover, but has significant supply under contract, then Oboloo's ideal for them.
And so you're covering 4 major areas: e-sourcing, contract management, supplier management, and savings management, which is a pretty broad sort of suite that you can that you've got under your umbrella there. But surely, if you're looking at sort of smaller businesses rather than enterprise level, isn't a sort of simple procure to pay platform what they really need?
I think from a finance perspective, procure to pay, or it's transactional. It's purchase to pay effectively. It's getting the purchase orders. It's making sure that the goods or services are received, and it's then making sure they're paid. Now that's very transactional. From our perspective, it's more strategic. It's looking at the whole procurement cycle. And as you pointed out, the 4 parts of the procurement cycle there. So you then obviously get the benefits of that, of having consistency of process. You have the transparency of what's going on along every part of the process. And then ultimately you have control. Now, from that, you can start saving time and money, which is obviously beneficial to an SME, especially when they have, constraints on resources already.
So if they're not already running an ERP system, and maybe you can share something on typically what you're seeing out there in the market, but if they're not already running an ERP system for their finance, what you're saying is then that if they took a procure to pay platform and they took Oboloo, those two could play pretty nicely together and cover pretty much the suite of what a typical business that size would need for both their transactional procure to pay as well as the more sort of strategic sourcing or supplier management sort of side of things.
Absolutely. Obviously, with a purchase to pay system, what you're getting at the end of it, you're getting some fantastic data. Now, if that data is then looked at and used, you can actually then use that data to start identifying opportunities, what the company actually needs, for then to when they're running sourcing activities, they can actually be getting exactly what they want. So that then enters into the whole procurement cycle of let's go out, let's go and do a deal, let's have a contract, let's manage those suppliers. And ultimately, if anything, you want to measure the savings so you can then see the success. So next time round, you can then review it again and it becomes cyclical.
Would something like this then would it be suited to companies that may not even have procurement? I mean, certainly at the lower end of the spectrum of the market that you're seeking to serve, often companies of that size, I think, 5 to 10 million pounds or dollars or euros, they wouldn't necessarily have a procurement team. They might have an office assistant that does the purchase orders, but they wouldn't necessarily have a built out procurement function. Would they still be able to use something like this, stakeholders that maybe are responsible for commercial decisions and still get value from it?
So any company of any size, be it a startup, is going to be having using a procurement process. They might not call it procurement. So for a startup, they would turn around and they would be looking at payment gateways. So for that, they would go out there, they'd look at the market, they would research it, they would then evaluate it and make sure that they had the right payment platform in place for themselves. Then that company then starts getting employees, and then any process that can be recorded or any process that can then be applied can then be used to those employees to make sure that they've got transparency and control. Now, when you're a smaller company, very easy to manage. When you start having employees and when you start having employee turnover, what you want to try and do is make sure you've got consistency. So if you're very small, you might be using spreadsheets. You might be using calendars, calendar to record important dates. You might be using shared drive to keep documents in. That's fine. But then when you start growing and you have more contracts and you have more suppliers and you've got more employees, that's when you want to have that control so that you've got records of it. If somebody's off sick or somebody leaves the company, you know why things have been done. So that's then when Oboloo comes in. You've obviously got a system that's recording all the information. There are very simple processes that are intuitive and simple to follow. You've got an audit trail of any changes that have been made. So what you can do, you might have a contract in place, and many times a procurement consultant I've got in somewhere and people don't know why they're working for a particular supplier. If you can go back and look at it and go, okay, this is the evaluation. This is why we're working with them. And then on top of that, from Oboloo's perspective, we then allow the companies, they can put in their own values, what's important to them, whatever that might be. It might be a particular part of ESG. They can then share those values with their suppliers, and their suppliers then respond, and they are then marked against the values that company holds important to them. So if they're going out there and advertising that they're very sustainable, they need to make sure that they're working with suppliers who are equally as sustainable. So, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And it kind of splits it between two different segments of the market, doesn't it? Because on the one hand, you've got, as you mentioned, companies that are growing and scaling very quickly and are maybe then just trying to play catch up in terms of their governance and their processes. And then on the other hand, you've got more established traditional businesses that historically just never really paid much attention to procurement beyond the sort of day-to-day transactional purchase to pay or, order processing type of functions. Where are you seeing the most interest in the market? If we just take a simplistic view of the world and separate it into those two.
So this is the interesting thing. Obviously, we have the 4 modules that are all included for Oboloo. But we're seeing that people there's demand for what we've seen so far, more for contract management and supplier management. Now, us having e-sourcing and the savings management and the values on top completes the cycle, but different companies have got different needs. Depending on where they are and how mature they are in that procurement process. A lot of people, as we said, don't even call it procurement. It's just something that happens. But everyone is using procurement. We all know the benefits of procurement when it's done well. And it's companies realizing the cost savings, the time savings, working with the right suppliers, making sure that they're managing their performance, their risk, making sure they're compliant. These are all things that people are now realizing, and it's becoming more and more important. Enterprise companies have been aware of this for many years. Now SMEs are becoming more aware of it, and the opportunity is there to do it themselves. And Oboloo enables them to do so.
So are you finding, if they're looking then for things like contract management and supplier management, is Oboloo feature rich enough for them to take, or are they looking for more of a specialist suite, or do they see the added advantage of the additional things that you're bringing to them as well as those modules?
So if we take something like contract management and all the modules in Oboloo designed to be simple and easy to use. Now, when you initially set up a new contract, it asks for the bare minimum of information that will allow you to manage that contract effectively. But once you've entered that, it then asks you, do you want to add more information? So it then asks you, you can then start naming who's actually managing it in your company. You can then start either upload the documents yourself, or you can ask the suppliers to upload contracts. So it's a bit like the TARDIS. You go in, or you see it from the outside, it looks like it's very small, but actually it opens up to a lot more. So it depends how much information you want to add, but the questions are there, and it's got the ability to store them.
And that sort of leads me on nicely to the next thing that I wanted to ask you, which is with anything that's aimed at the sort of lower end of the market in terms of company size, there's always going to be a compromise in terms of pricing versus features and functionality, because inevitably the smaller the business, typically the smaller the budget they will have to spend on software. So is it a particular challenge or conundrum for you when you're looking at product development and looking at features, finding that specific sweet spot?
So when it comes to features and functionality, we believe that we've created Oboloo that has all the functions and features that an SME requires. So any company can effectively run sourcing activities, manage their contracts, their suppliers, and savings. Now, if they want to then have auctions and things we don't have auctions on there. But from our perspective, it provides everything that you would need. It creates permanent records. They can either be archived, they can be live. I guess just as in the CRM system, when it was first created, it was for enterprise-sized companies. Now, every company, no matter what their size, has a CRM system. Where we see Oboloo is almost, let's call it the SRM. We're more than an SRM system. But that's where we see it going, that actually, why shouldn't a company of any size have access to the advantages of using a procurement software and making themselves as competitive as possible against the big boys?
So just a quick interlude, because there are a couple of things that I really want to make you aware of, because I think they will be valuable for you. So number one, we now have a monthly newsletter where we bring you curated content of everything that's happening in the digital procurement space. If you want to get that, just head to procuretechpodcast.com/newsletter, enter your name and email, and we'll get that delivered straight to your inbox. Number two, if you're a head of procurement or a center of excellence leader, and you're perhaps a little bit confused or overwhelmed with what's out there as best of breed digital procurement technology, especially if you're a mid-sized business, schedule a call with me. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes in this episode. Just hit that schedule a call link, and we can have a quick chat to understand your challenges and what potential solutions out there may be suitable for your organization. And now let's get right back to this week's show. And that's a really good point about auctions, actually, because even if there was a company that had a big enough spend on a particular category that necessitated or that drove them to run auctions, they can always go out and hire a consultant to use a piece of software that's accessible to that sort of segment to run an auction for them as a paid service. You know, they're only going to be doing 1, 2, 3 auctions a year, even if they are in the position that they want to do it. And it probably doesn't facilitate the need for them to go out and buy a separate e-auction software. Looking at the market segment that you're going after, once a company gets 100 million plus, there is an argument to perhaps have their own software. So yeah, no, I can see the logic behind that and where you're maybe having to make tough decisions between features and price point. You don't want to overkill it, do you, and make it so complex for people to use, especially on features that they may not really take much advantage of.
100%. I mean, with any digital solution, be it in procurement or whatever else it might be, there are three main considerations. There's obviously the processes and the outcomes, budget, and then the third part, which is the most important, I believe, is people. Now, you could have the most amazing, all singing, all dancing system, but if people won't use it because it's not user friendly, then it's a waste of money, because you'll never get those deliveries that you thought, those outcomes that you were paying for. So Oboloo has been designed to be as simple, as intuitive as possible. And I'll be quite honest, from a design perspective, it's more difficult to make something simple than it is complicated. It could have been far more complicated.
That's an interesting insight, actually. I've not thought of it that way, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got some fantastic product guys who actually really ask some very deep questions. Do you need to do this? No, you don't. Actually, let's reduce the number of steps. Let's make it as simple as possible. Everyone in their daily life is doing procurement. They don't call it procurement. They don't know it's procurement, but they are following a procurement cycle. It might be purchasing whatever, a new car or whatever else it is. They are doing it. So actually, that's where Oboloo is coming in. It's providing the processes, it's providing the records, it's providing the alerts, and it's providing a way of measuring it. And that's a simple way of looking at it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how you came to decide on your specific pricing model, because the reason I want to ask this is because, number one, you're very transparent about this on your website, and a lot of procurement technology companies are not. You have to book a demo or get in touch with them before they'll reveal what the thing costs. But the other reason why I'm curious about this is, as we kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, your target market is going to be way more price sensitive than larger businesses are. So maybe just walk me through what your logic was and how you arrived at the particular price model that you have done.
Sure. So from our perspective, we know that SMEs, as you said, are price sensitive. They want to be getting the best value for money. As software as a service has evolved over the last few years, there's a lot of very good software that is competitively priced to give SMEs access to the similar level of expertise that they're getting from the enterprise level companies are getting. So from us, it was very important to price it so that SMEs would find it attractive and go, do you know what? The ROI on that's fantastic. And we're managing our liabilities. We're managing those contracts. And that's what we wanted to do is make it so it's accessible for SMEs.
So we've covered pricing, which is obviously going to be a key factor in any negotiation at that level. So let's pretend if I'm a CFO, or probably even a CEO of a company that size, which is typically who you would be selling this to, what would you list as the three major advantages of using a simple but effective digital procurement platform, taking aside what we said that it doesn't cover procure to pay?
I guess the number one consideration for a CEO or CFO is that you've spent a lot of money, resource on marketing and sales to bring in the revenue. A procurement software like Oboloo is there to help protect that revenue. It's to stop wasting money. It's to help save you time and money. So it's effectively helping protect that bottom line. The next thing from our perspective, from Oboloo's perspective, it's helping companies promote their values, whatever they may be, to their suppliers, and working with suppliers who share their values. So obviously, if you've got companies and it might be around sustainability, that's part of their brand. They need to be working with suppliers who also follow that ethos. And then I guess the last part is obviously from working and managing suppliers and doing it properly, suppliers have got so much to offer. It might be innovation. It might be a different quality. It might be a different way of doing things. That's fantastic. And actually, by managing the whole process, hopefully it will help companies to open their eyes to work with suppliers that perhaps they wouldn't have worked with.
That's pretty convincing.
I don't know. Does that sound fair?
No, I think it does, and it's always the battle, isn't it? And I have these conversations with anyone that's selling something business to business. It's always around the value proposition and what rate of return will they see on their investment versus anything else that they could spend the money on?
So I was going to say, James, we can be, very basic in terms of an ROI. There was a survey, I believe, in 2014. I think it was PwC did, that said by managing your third-party spend, you could save anywhere between 7 and 12%. So imagine you're spending £100,000 spend, and you could manage that. You could be saving anywhere between £7,000 and £12,000. Well, imagine you're spending £1 million, then the numbers become significant. And obviously, with the cost point with Oboloo, the ROI is huge.
Yeah, as long as you've got people that know how to use it and have got it's like anything, isn't it? People together with the right system or with the right software, it can create a fantastic outcome.
100%.
I mean, you're a pretty new company, and I know that you're growing pretty quickly since you launched this. Do you see your growth being in an out of the box model, or are you starting to see more inquiries now that want to customize it and have more of a done for you solution that can, to your point earlier, that maybe expand on some of the modules that are more interesting to them?
Interesting question. It was when Oboloo was, I guess, born. The idea was for it to be an out of the box, and that's what it was going to be. As it's evolving, we're involved in customizations. We've done customizations already, and we're involved in other customizations. So it's a question of Oboloo is incredibly agile because we are a young company. And as an example of that, when I demoed to you several months ago, you came up with the idea of having floating descriptions of each of the icons on the menu box. That's now been actioned. So again, it's one of those things that because of the size of us, we can be very agile. And if somebody comes to us with a great idea, we will more than happily introduce it to everyone. If companies have got specifics, it might be around contract management or supplier management, we're more than happy to sit down with them and to see whether it makes sense to customize for them.
So it's really just maintaining that flexibility, which I guess is the beauty of being a pretty lean startup.
Definitely, 100%.
So final question, Adam, if anyone would like to find out a little bit more about Oboloo or to maybe book a demo, what's the best place that they can get hold of you?
The best place is on our website or by emailing hello@oboloo.com. I mean, something that we are doing, we recently launched an initiative called the Oboloo Program for Charities and Non-Profits, and we're doing that. It's rolled out, started in the UK through a company called partner Charity Digital, which is actually offering Oboloo to charities and non-profits to the standard subscription and 50% discount. What we're trying to do, we would love to support charities and non-profits. So anything we can do to do that, we're here to help.
And I will link to all of that in the show notes. Adam, thank you for coming on the show. Be interesting to see how you grow over the next 12 months and be watching you closely. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
So I personally think that the SME market is something that is ripe for this type of technology. And I'm amazed really that there aren't that many other companies out there that are doing it. So thanks again to Adam for a great interview and insights on how procurement software can benefit some of the smaller companies out there. And to you, thank you very much for listening to the show. We're aware that there are other procurement podcasts out there, and we're very happy that you've chosen to insert us into your earballs on this fine day. We will catch you again, same time next week. Until then, take care, all the best, and speak to you soon. Bye for now.